This is the podcast overview for the objectives for Chapter 7, Interpersonal Attraction, Close Relationships, and Love. So first, you want to be able to describe the need for affiliation, including its key characteristics and modes of expression. So right off the bat, in the beginning of the chapter, it talks about why, as humans, we have a desire to affiliate, to belong, to be with other people. Why is this true? Why is this the case? What are some of the key characteristics of affiliation, and how do we express that? State the two most important characteristics of affect, and note how emotions can influence attraction. So affect is like your way of being, the emotions that you show on your face and in your body and non-verbally. And so how do your emotions play into that? And how can this then influence your attraction to someone? You'll want to look at how proximity and repeated exposure can influence your attraction for others, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. I've included a video this week that actually talks about this too, so that will help. Consider how and why people evaluate others on the basis of physical attraction. So like what kinds of things do men and women look at when they're taking into account attractiveness of other people? Why do we use certain things as a benchmark for attractiveness, and what would those things be? As a culture, we tend to gravitate towards some of the same types of features that we look for. That dictates whether a person is attractive. What would those features be as a whole? And of course, there are always exceptions to the rule, but there are a lot of generalities too. Understand the what is beautiful is good effect. This is kind of a phenomenon that happens. It's also called the halo effect. I have a video this week as well that discusses this in great detail, so please check that out. Note the key features associated with physical attractiveness that is irrespective or non-related to one's sex. So it doesn't really matter what sex you are. What are some key features that we tend to point out and gravitate towards that are associated with physical attractiveness? Consider the degree to which certain stereotypes about physical attractiveness are accurate. So, we've covered a lot so far about stereotypes. How might those play a role when you're thinking about the physical attractiveness of somebody else? And are those always accurate? Do the stereotypes of attractiveness always hold up? Understand the role that similarity plays in attraction. The research talks a lot about looking for similarities in partners, in friends. So we're not just talking about romantic partners here. We're talking about friendships as well. Why do we tend to gravitate towards similarity? And do opposites, in fact, attract? So that's a good question. It's kind of a myth buster. We hear a lot about opposites attract. Well, is that true? How? Why? What are the specifics? Know the research there. Explain how attraction is determined by the proportion of similarity. So this kind of plays in to the question preceding, but like proportions on the human face and things like that make a difference in similarity and attraction. Explain the repulsion hypothesis and how it's viewed by most contemporary social psychologists. So this is kind of a hypothesis that goes way back to evolutionary theory. So it's something that social psychologists have looked at in the past, but how is it viewed today by contemporary social psychologists? Be familiar with the matching hypothesis and how it predicts who we might choose as mates and why. So this is with romantic relationships. Highlight the key predictions of balance theory. So that's Heider. We've talked about him in the past on other areas, but he has this idea about balance theory and how we pick our friends and mates. outline some of the major characteristics parent-child and sibling relationships. So here we're moving into the realm of familial and family relationships, which is important here. A lot of those early relationships set the stage for how we then relate to friends when we're older and romantic partners. And so what are some of the major characteristics that stand out in parent-child and sibling relationships? And then compare and contrast the various types of attachment styles we have with our parents. So this is some developmental research here, but it's super important. How we attach to our parents is very indicative of how we attach to later partners in life and the types of friendships we form. Whether or not we have a good attachment to our parents can predict a lot of what often goes right or wrong in our relationships later in life. And this is why in counseling psychology, when somebody's having difficulty in relationships, oftentimes they'll start to talk about the past. They'll talk about how their relationships were with their parents, because we can find out a lot about a person and maybe their struggles today by knowing what their struggles were in the past with their parents and what kinds of parenting they had. Consider the nature of close friendships and highlight how same-sex and opposite-sex friendships tend to function. What are some elements there? Explain why and how a romantic relationship differs from a close friendship. We kind of know that, but do we? So don't assume here that that's an obvious answer to that question. Look and see what the research says. Clarify how passionate love differs from unrequited and companionate love. So these are all types of love that Sternberg talks about in his triangular model of love. You're going to want to really know all the combinations he talks about with love. He has three main areas of love in his triangle, but then those three combine to make all sorts of variety of combinations. And so you'll want to know what those are. And specifically, when we talk about passionate love, how is that very different from what's called unrequited or companionate love? Understand the role of jealousy in a threat to the stability of relationships. So towards the end of the chapter, the author talks a lot about sort of the thorns in relationships, which is just a metaphor to say things that can cause trouble in relationships. And jealousy is definitely one of those. Who is more prone to jealousy? And why, and how does that affect the stability overall of a relationship, friendship, or a romantic relationship? And then discuss the differences in what men and women seek in romantic partners. There are differences, and they exist. What are they? And that wraps up the objectives for Chapter 7.